Elena had always felt a peculiar connection to the forest behind her grandmother's house. As a child, she would spend hours playing among the trees, weaving through the underbrush, and listening to the gentle rustling of leaves. The forest was her sanctuary, a place of solace and adventure. But as she grew older, her visits became less frequent, and the once comforting woods began to take on an eerie presence. When her grandmother passed away, Elena inherited the old house. She decided to spend a few weeks there to sort through her grandmother's belongings and decide what to do with the property. It was late autumn, and the forest was bathed in hues of red, orange, and yellow. The beauty of the season masked the growing unease she felt about returning to the woods. The first night in the house was uneventful. Elena sorted through boxes, reminiscing about her childhood and the warmth her grandmother had brought to the home. She fell asleep on the couch, wrapped in an old quilt, with the distant sounds of the forest lulling her into a deep slumber. On the second night, Elena was jolted awake by a soft, almost imperceptible whispering. She sat up, heart pounding, and listened intently. The whispers seemed to be coming from the forest. She shook her head, telling herself it was just the wind, and tried to go back to sleep. But the whispers persisted, growing louder and more distinct. Curiosity and a hint of fear drove her to the window. She peered into the darkness, straining her eyes to see anything beyond the shadows of the trees. The whispering stopped abruptly, leaving an unsettling silence in its wake. She closed the curtains and forced herself back to bed, but sleep eluded her for the rest of the night. The next morning, Elena decided to explore the forest. She hoped that facing it head-on would dispel the strange feelings that had been plaguing her. She donned her hiking boots and set off, following the familiar path that led deep into the woods. The forest was quiet, save for the occasional chirping of birds and the crunch of leaves underfoot. As she ventured further, she noticed something strange. The trees seemed to be growing closer together, their branches intertwining to form a canopy that blocked out the sunlight. The air grew colder, and the shadows deepened. Despite the chill, Elena pressed on, driven by a mix of determination and curiosity. After what felt like hours of walking, she came upon a clearing. In the center stood an ancient oak tree, its gnarled branches stretching skyward like skeletal fingers. The ground around the tree was barren, devoid of the usual underbrush. Elena felt a shiver run down her spine as she approached the tree. There was something off about it, something that made her skin crawl. As she circled the tree, she noticed strange symbols carved into the bark. They were unlike anything she had ever seen, intricate and haunting. She reached out to touch one of the carvings, and the moment her fingers brushed the bark, a wave of cold washed over her. The whispers returned, louder and more urgent than before. Elena. She jerked her hand back, heart racing. The whispering was unmistakable now, and it was calling her name. She stumbled away from the tree, the whispers growing louder and more frantic with each step. She turned and ran, crashing through the underbrush, desperate to escape the voices that seemed to be chasing her. When she finally burst out of the forest and into the backyard of her grandmother's house, she was gasping for breath. She slammed the door shut behind her and leaned against it, trying to calm her racing heart. The whispers had stopped, but the sense of unease lingered. Over the next few days, Elena did her best to avoid the forest. She focused on sorting through her grandmother's belongings, but the memory of the ancient oak and the strange symbols haunted her. She found herself drawn to the window each night, listening for the whispers that now seemed to be a constant presence. One evening, as she was sorting through a box of old photographs, she found a faded journal. It was her grandmother's, filled with handwritten entries dating back decades. Elena flipped through the pages, hoping to find some comfort in her grandmother's words. Instead, she found something far more disturbing. The entries began innocuously enough, detailing daily life and the joys of raising a family. But as Elena read on, the tone of the journal changed. Her grandmother wrote about the forest, about the whispers that had plagued her for years. She described the ancient oak tree and the symbols carved into its bark. She spoke of strange dreams and a growing sense of dread. Elena's hands trembled as she read the final entry. The whispers are getting louder. They call to me every night, begging me to come to the forest. I fear what they want, but I can no longer resist. If I do not return, know that I loved you all dearly. Beware the oak, for it is a doorway to darkness. Elena closed the journal, her mind racing. Her grandmother had been tormented by the same whispers, the same sense of unease. She had gone into the forest and never returned. A cold realization settled over Elena. The forest had taken her grandmother, and now it was calling to her. That night, the whispers were louder than ever. They echoed through the house, seeping into her mind and filling her with an overwhelming urge to return to the forest. She fought against it, but the pull was too strong. With trembling hands, she grabbed a flashlight and headed outside. The night was cold and moonless, the darkness thick and oppressive. Elena's flashlight barely pierced the shadows as she made her way to the forest's edge. The whispers guided her, growing louder and more insistent with each step. She followed them, unable to resist their call. When she reached the ancient oak, the whispers stopped. The silence was deafening, and the air was thick with an ominous presence. Elena shone her flashlight on the tree, illuminating the strange symbols carved into its bark. She could feel the cold emanating from the tree, a bone-chilling cold that seemed to seep into her very soul. She took a step closer, and then another, until she was standing before the tree. Her hand reached out, almost of its own accord, and touched one of the symbols. The moment her fingers made contact, the ground beneath her feet shifted. She tried to pull away, but it was too late. The earth opened up, swallowing her whole. Elena tumbled through darkness, her screams swallowed by the void. She landed hard on cold, damp ground, the air knocked from her lungs. She lay there for a moment, disoriented and terrified, before slowly sitting up. She was in a cavern, the walls glistening with moisture. The air was thick with the scent of decay. She got to her feet, her flashlight flickering in the darkness. The cavern stretched out before her, a labyrinth of tunnels and passages. The whispers had returned, but they were different now. They were clearer, more distinct, and they spoke in a language she didn't understand. With no other choice, Elena began to walk. The whispers guided her, leading her deeper into the labyrinth. As she walked, she noticed strange markings on the walls, similar to the symbols on the oak tree. They seemed to pulse with an eerie light, casting long shadows that danced and writhed. She had no idea how long she walked, but eventually she came to a large chamber. In the center stood a stone altar covered in more of the strange symbols. The whispers were deafening now, a cacophony of voices that filled her mind and made it hard to think. On the altar lay a figure, motionless and shrouded in darkness. Elena approached cautiously, her heart pounding in her chest. As she drew closer, she realized with a jolt of horror that it was her grandmother. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and her eyes were open, staring blankly at the ceiling. "Elena." The voice was unmistakable, and it was coming from her grandmother's lips. Elena stumbled back, her mind reeling. This couldn't be real. It had to be a nightmare. "Help me." The voice was soft, pleading. Elena took a hesitant step forward, then another. She reached out a trembling hand and touched her grandmother's cold, lifeless skin. The moment she made contact, a surge of energy coursed through her. The whispers grew louder, a torrent of voices that threatened to overwhelm her. "Elena, you must break the seal." Her grandmother's voice was clear now, cutting through the cacophony. Elena looked around, her mind racing. The symbols. They were the key. She had to destroy them. With renewed determination, she grabbed a nearby rock and began to chip away at the symbols on the altar. The whispers grew frantic, but she ignored them, focusing on her task. One by one, the symbols shattered, their eerie light fading. As she destroyed the final symbol, the ground shook, and the whispers stopped abruptly. The cavern began to collapse, the walls crumbling and the ceiling caving in. Elena turned and ran, her heart pounding in her chest. She navigated the labyrinth as fast as she could, dodging falling debris and avoiding the collapsing tunnels. Just as she thought she would be buried alive, she saw a faint light ahead. She sprinted towards it, diving through the opening just as the tunnel collapsed behind her. She landed hard on the forest floor, gasping for breath. The night was silent, the forest still. Elena lay there for a moment, staring up at the stars. She had done it. The whispers were gone, and the forest was no longer a place of dread. She took a deep breath, feeling a sense of peace she hadn't felt in a long time. Her grandmother's words echoed in her mind. "Beware the oak, for it is a doorway to darkness." Elena got to her feet, dusted herself off, and made her way back to the house. She knew she would never forget what had happened, but she also knew that she had broken the cycle. The forest was free, and so was she.